American Comics. My Warhammer Simulator Chapter 471-480. It was imaginable. What a magnificent scene it would be to have 150 tall, muscular strongmen with an average height of 2 meters 30 or 40, lined up to take a shower. Unfortunately, neither Roche himself nor Iron Man David was surprised by this. After all 150 people present had completed the final spore cleaning procedure, Iron Man David personally arranged the private rooms for each Astartes and distributed temporary clothing. Moreover, it thoughtfully had automatic servo robots on standby 24 hours a day, ready to answer the calls of the Lamenters. This undoubtedly made the Lamenters, who rarely used mortal servants and mostly did things themselves, feel flattered and somewhat unaccustomed. At the same time, Roche, having removed his vibranium power armor and undergone a disinfection procedure, got up and went to the manufacturing plant on the secondary island. He found Astartes, who was still pondering over some scientific problems. He inquired in detail about the reserve situation of various parts of the Terminator power armor. At this moment, the servo skull, driven by the anti-gravity engine to rotate back and forth, seemed to have found a reason for temporary relief. It chattered endlessly to Roche about the armor library that it and Doom had just built to cope with various usage scenarios. The so-called armor library was actually just a storage method where power armor components of various models were neatly placed in categories. They could be called upon by automatic servo-robotic arms at any time. However, Roche, who had just acquired a batch of Astartes manpower, was in high spirits and too lazy to haggle with Astartes about these things. After reluctantly encouraging him a few words, he left the manufacturing plant contentedly. In the following period, Roche planned to replace all 150 Lamenters Astartes with Terminator squads wearing tactical dreadnought armor. As for the standard power armor, it could also be replaced with speed-type power armor to cope with combat needs on different battlefields. After all, with the current ultra-high productivity of the Gemini Island base, it was more than enough to maintain the daily consumption of the Lamenters, who numbered less than 2 companies, and a Carcharodon's chapter. Soon after, the people in the Gemini Island base, especially those gang dogs who were undergoing daily training, suddenly they were surprised to find that those tall giants called Astartes appeared once again on their training grounds. However, compared to the gray-white giants of the previous time, who exuded an aura of unapproachability from their appearance alone, these unfamiliar giants, some bald and some with short hair, were noticeably friendlier in their attitude. Some of the Chaplin brothers even spent less than 24 hours to barely master a language mode that could be used for daily communication with the gang dogs. This even caused Iron Man David, who originally wanted to arrange automatic servo robots for translation and communication, to be a little shocked. Of course, Roche, who learned of this, was not very surprised. After all, the superhuman qualities of the Astartes are not only reflected on the battlefield. If Roche had brought back Astartes belonging to the Ultramarines this time, then he might be able to completely become a hands-off shopkeeper. He only needed to wait patiently for the other party to continuously operate the various forces under his command, and then look for an opportunity to launch a unification war. In fact, before Roche returned, he had hinted to Chapter Master Calgar of the Ultramarines about recruiting a few Ultramarines in his words. However, perhaps Calgar's own character was too rigid, or perhaps he simply didn't understand his hint. In short, Rock's few ideas were completely nipped in the bud before they could fully unfold. However, gaining 150 Astartes was not a losing proposition for Roche. More importantly, in addition to the Techmarines that each company would be equipped with, there were also 2 apothecary brothers who had personally experienced the Astartes surgery process. So, when Roche unexpectedly learned of this news from Iron Man David, he hurriedly called the 2 apothecary brothers to his presence. Then, Roche, with a smiling face, was temporarily splashed with cold water by the 2 succinct individuals. After this period of getting along with the gang dogs, these Lamenters confirmed that the physical fitness of the crowd has met the basic conditions to become an Astartes recruit. However, in addition to the problem of the source of the gene seed that needs to be solved, The biggest problem for Roche at present is actually the time to manufacture qualified Astartes. Even for the Lamenters, a fleet-based chapter that was built because of the curse, and has been disliked by the high-level officials of Terra for many years. It would take a long period of 5 to 10 years to successfully train an Astartes who can step onto the battlefield and fight. And this is to ensure that there will be no strange failures in the various surgical procedures. Alright, apothecary brothers, I will arrange for a biologist who is proficient in biotechnology to learn the procedures of various operations from you later. You can leave. At this moment, Roche, who took a deep breath, said to the two apothecary brothers in front of him. Then, he waved his hand to let the two of them temporarily leave the interior of the room. At this moment, Iron Man David, who was standing aside, seemed to have noticed something. Its blue light flashing in its eye sockets, it was about to speak to comfort the expressionless Roche. Roche, who narrowed his eyes slightly, suddenly shook his head and said, "No need to comfort me, David, I don't feel much frustration. In fact, I have other ideas now. Since I can't temporarily have offspring that only belong to me, then I might as well broaden my horizons. All chapters Astartes can become my offspring. In fact, there are many Astartes chapters in our old home that are struggling on the verge of annihilation or defection, some of which can be completely saved, especially those chapters from the cursed founding. As long as the Emperor is willing to give me a suitable opportunity, I can personally become the Primarch father of hundreds of thousands of Astartes. Of course, I don't want to be given the title of Warmaster by others. This thing is always unlucky." At this moment, Roche, who couldn't help but blink his eyes, showed Iron Man David a little of his grand ambition in his heart. And Iron Man David, who shook his metal head slightly, could only subconsciously spread out his two metal palms. It said to Roche in a helpless tone, "My lord, if you think this method is appropriate, then so be it." My lord? There is a special situation on the circular plaza? At this moment, Iron Man David, with blue light flashing in its eye sockets, quickly issued a warning message to Roche in front of it. And Roche, who had just noticed the simulator vibrating, immediately opened the page and glanced at it. "Tisk, our dedicated Carcharodon's chapter is delivering goods to our door. Thank you for your support. Buzz buzz buzz." Above the circular plaza still under expansion, accompanying the silent emergence of a spatial rift, three disheveled and slightly embarrassed red figures swiftly materialized under the shadow of a massive mechanical construct. Clack clack clack. At the same time, squads of dormant Ouse creature machine guards instantly revived. Wielding chainsword-equipped mechanical tentacles and laser weaponry, they surged forward, heavily surrounding these newly arrived strangers. A Mechanicum army? These are all Ouse creature machine guards. In the distance, there are even Fortress Star-type Mechanicum combat drones being activated? Where exactly have those cold-blooded Astartes sent us? Just then, a figure clad in the robes of a Mechanicum Magos, whose face was hidden beneath a metal mask, and who possessed a petite frame, gently waved a mechanical hand, a clear, feminine voice emanating from beneath the mask. The next second, a Castellan robot, towering at approximately 4 meters in height, abruptly began to move with heavy steps. The massive, red-armored mechanical construct swiftly spread its mechanical arms, interposing itself between the female Mechanicum Magos and the Mechanicum army. Oh ho! An artificial intelligence whose consciousness has just begun to awaken. My lord, it seems this oil-slicked girl has quite the nerve. However, at that moment, the Castellan robot, which had just intended to swing its mechanical arms to launch an attack, instantly froze in place. A series of binary code, almost imperceptible to the human ear, suddenly resounded from its vocalizer. Even its massive mechanical frame instantly went silent. Immediately following this, Roche, now clad in a vibranium power armor, and Iron Man David, shaking his head, leisurely stepped into the circular plaza from the passageway. Clearly, the opponent's only reliance, the massive mechanical construct, had been successfully seized by Iron Man David. Each of you will have 3 minutes to explain your true origins to me. Dare to lie or try to deceive me, and I will immediately send you to meet the Emperor. At this moment, Roche, casually raising the furnace heart,
surveyed the three unfamiliar figures before him one by one.
Without any emotional fluctuations, he swiftly questioned the almost motionless Mechanicum personnel.
Based on Roach's long-term experience with Redditus, often, dealing with the Mechanicum folks doesn't require too much politeness.
Indeed, perhaps due to the immense psychological pressure exerted by the surrounding Mechanicum army and Roach's furnace heart. A bald man, clearly dressed as a tech priest, immediately raised a mechanical arm and cautiously said to Roach and the others,
"I am a tech priest of the Deathwatch. I was merely planning to return to Mars for some further study, but a group of unreasonable Astartes raided my ship.
Besides looting all the resources on board, they also kidnapped me, saying that it was my honor to serve the esteemed Primarch.
Let me state in advance, I am just an ordinary tech priest, and I don't possess any precious STCs. In me, I am a fabricator Enginseer affiliated with the Imperial Guard.
I merely wanted to hitch a ride on this colleague's ship back to Mars, but we were drinking machine oil and singing hymns when suddenly we were sent here by your Astartes." At this moment, before the tech priest could finish speaking, another middle-aged man wearing a respirator hastily began to explain. And Roach, expressionless, took a deep breath and sighed.
He once again refreshed his understanding of the Shark Eaters chapter's crude way of doing things.
Subsequently, Roach's gaze slowly focused on the red robes of the female Mechanicum Magos.
If he wasn't mistaken, clearly, this Magos was the main event, and the other two were more like freebies that the Shark Eaters chapter had casually tossed in.
To some extent, I actually came here willingly. I offended many Mechanicum colleagues for using abominable intelligence without authorization, as well as consuming an extremely precious Omni tool. And it just so happened that the Shark Eaters chapter had previously engaged in some shady gray market transactions with me, so we can be considered acquaintances, so, you understand.
Please allow me to ask, since you can allow an ancient Iron Man to appear so openly, then, esteemed unknown Primarch, do you allow the existence of more forbidden research here?
At this moment, the female Mechanicum Magos, without concealment, briefly explained her specific origins to Roach. And Roach, slightly raising his eyebrows, deeply gazed at the metal mask on the other party's face.
He slowly lowered the furnace heart in his palm. Then, Roach raised a few thick fingers, encased in vibranium, towards the three people before him.
The rules here are actually very few. The first thing is that you Mechanicum folks must learn to respect the lives of others.
There are no servitors here, so without my orders or permission, human experimentation is forbidden in my base, violators die. Second, any forbidden research projects must be discussed through the Round Table Conference, and at least 3 people must agree before research can continue, otherwise, violators also die. Third, anyone can voluntarily or passively make scientific contributions to our team. If you are worried about making mistakes, then just do the work you are most familiar with. But if I discover that you dare to act against my orders, you can imagine the consequences yourselves. And besides that, there are no other rules in my base, it can be said to be quite free. Roach's calm words slowly echoed in the circular plaza. And the 3 newcomers, having carefully listened to all the content, subconsciously looked at each other. Among them, the tech priest and the fabricator Enginseer clearly breathed a sigh of relief. They were grateful that they had not come to the territory of a traitor legion or the Dark Mechanicum. And the Mechanicum Magos, with a higher status, was silent for a while. After a long time, the other party slowly nodded to the expressionless Roach. Thank you, Lord Primarch, for taking me in. I will represent Mars and do my best to make a contribution to you and the Emperor, and I just happen to possess detailed blueprints for several ancient vehicles, and I am also proficient in many mechanical technologies. This place may allow my research realm to reach a higher level. Without much emotional change, the female Mechanicum Magos said in a clear and calm voice.
You can call me Magos Neil. As for this Iron Man, can you release the mental shackles of my steel friend?
Iron Man David, the blue light in his eye sockets flickering, turned his head to look at Roach. And Roach, squinting his eyes, sized up the other party a few more times before slowly nodding to Iron Man David.
Now, you can go and get to know your future leader, my only tech priest, Redditus.
Thank you all for your support. Neil the Sage was actually a data craftsman.
Her greatest skill was using doctrinal chips to manipulate Castellan robots for a certain degree of combat missions. Therefore, the title of sage she possessed was not of the research type. Instead, she was an exploration sage specifically responsible for exploring ancient ruins and seeking technological relics. In fact, if Sage Neil hadn't chosen to run away in advance, and hadn't died on the exploration road or at the hands of the Inquisition, then she might have been able to touch the title of Obtainer of All Things or Saintly Scholar, after thousands of years, which would have been a chance to become a Grand Sage of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Of course, unless Neil the Sage at that time really found a precious STC from the Golden Age or the Dark Age of technology, and achieved great results for the Adeptus Mechanicus or the Imperium of Man without any side effects, she shouldn't even think about such a possibility. Dong, dong, dong. At this moment, Roche, slowly driving the vibranium power armor, was leading 3 hillbillies who were looking around to the forge factory on the Second Sun Island. After everyone passed through the underground passage connecting the 2 islands and arrived at their destination, the servo-skull Reditus, who had just reprimanded the automatic robots, was obviously pleasantly surprised to have new recruits besides Doom Jr. It hurriedly drove the anti-gravity engine to circle around everyone in midair for a few times, warmly welcoming the arrival of these Adeptus Mechanicus colleagues, while the 3 hillbillies were subconsciously observing the forge factory. Roche quietly instructed Reditus a few words. He needed the servo-skull to manage these newcomers well, and try to get them to contribute all the technological blueprints or ancient technologies they possessed. Of course, if other troubles occurred in the forge factory afterwards, interfering with the operation plan of other production lines, then Reditus, as the manager, would be personally held accountable. At this moment, the servo-skull, in a state of excitement, made a guarantee to Roche without hesitation. It believed that it would definitely make these new colleagues obediently offer their loyalty and shine for the future of the Gemini Island base. Open black lens bracket. The old book friend who has known me for 10 years recommended me a book chasing app, Source app. It's really easy to use. I rely on this to read and listen to books to pass the time while driving and before going to bed. You can download it here. Close black lens bracket. However, Roche himself held reservations about this. But he didn't immediately remind Reditus, but instead allowed the other party to play freely. In the following period of time, Roche, who focused his attention on the Lamenters, did not go to the forge factory for a single step. He only continued to monitor any movements on the Second Sun Island through Iron Man David. According to Iron Man David's report, the current forge factory was obviously divided into 2 factions. Servo-skull Reditus accepted the Engineer and the Tech Priest, while Sage Neil was temporarily isolated by everyone. If Iron Man David hadn't arranged a forging platform and temporary residence for her, Sage Neil might have had problems even with basic survival. However, Sage Neil quickly came up with research results. She successfully manufactured a prototype of the Taurus assault vehicle and sorted out a production line that could be set up at any time. Even if she was just an exploration sage, her basic knowledge and experience were much stronger than Reditus. What stimulated Reditus even more was that Doom did not agree with the isolation of Sage Neil, and he would often ask her for some technological insights and knowledge. Although Doom could be reprimanded by Reditus at will in many cases, everyone with discerning eyes in the base could see Rock's intention to cultivate Doom. Therefore, Reditus, filled with anger, had nowhere to vent it. It could only completely shift its attention to the 2 colleagues who had defected to it, trying to come up with some technological products that could attract Rock's attention as soon as possible. Unfortunately, the next one to come up with results was not Reditus, but Doom himself. Doom extracted a shield force field technology called Repulsor Grid from the metal body of Neil the Sage's Castellan robot through research. Although it didn't run perfectly due to various reasons, it could be temporarily used. And Doom generously included Reditus in the ranks of developers and reported the matter to Iron Man David. As a result, the forge factory on the Second Sun Island continued to operate in a strange state of balance. The Reditus faction and the Sage Neil faction often disliked each other. In Doom, as an independent individual, would occasionally help the disadvantaged party, or choose to stay neutral. According to Doom's words, the current forge factory has entered a good competitive mechanism. As long as the production line doesn't have any problems, it's a good thing. Since then, Rorschach no longer paid attention to anything in the forge factory. He devoted almost all of his attention to the Lamenter's chapter. Because as time passed, even if Rorschach often entered the Warhammer universe, the sacred number of the Chaos Gods was also constantly decreasing. The first Chaos God's blessing was coming soon. He needed to completely arm the 150 Astartes before this. Therefore, while Rorschach was training the Lamenters to familiarize themselves with the Terminator armor and combat formations, he was discussing with Iron Man David how to modify some basic things of the Lamenters chapter. First of all, the spray color most often used by the Lamenters chapter needs to be changed. The dark yellow coating is always unlucky. Even without the cursed founding thing, there are not many chapters that use yellow coating all year round that live well. For example, the Imperial Fists chapter, nicknamed Pod Fist. In the end, Rorschach chose to retain the Lamenters chapter's teardrop heart symbol. But the outer coating of the power armor was reset to a half black and half white black and white form. Rorschach also sought the opinions of the Lamenters Astartes on this matter. However, everyone believed that since the Primarch wanted to change the image of the chapter, then they had no requirements. After all, even the Terminator armor was provided by the Primarch. Subsequently, Rorschach divided these 150 Astartes into the Lamenter's First Company and the Lamenter's Second Company. In order to ensure fairness, the number of people in each company was not fully staffed. Rorschach planned to fill the remaining vacancies with more stormtrooper squads and rotate them on time. In this way, the tradition of veterans leading new recruits can be formed. Even if there is a chance for the stormtroopers to become Astartes in the future, they can quickly familiarize themselves with the corresponding chapter environment. It's just that it wasn't long. Just when Rorschach and others were enthusiastically training the Astartes companies and carrying out preparatory missions, a sudden bad news was quickly transmitted to Rock's ears by Iron Man David. It also temporarily disrupted everyone's next planned deployment. Madame Gao is dead. Moreover, she was killed by an unknown enemy with a sniper bullet that shattered her entire head. Even the panacea that Iron Man David specifically provided for senior personnel couldn't save her. Since the previous CEO of Empire Industries was dealt with by Iron Man David for reasons of loyalty, he sought out a young girl with high education but no work experience to become the puppet president of Empire Industries on the surface. Secretly, the most loyal Madame Gao became the true person in power at Empire Industries. Of course, all of this was done under the remote command of Iron Man David. So, the real decision makers behind the scenes were still Luo Shah and Iron Man David. Madame Gao is dead, and she was assassinated. At this moment, Luo Shah, who had just learned of this, frowned slightly. He slowly activated his vibranium power armor and stood up from beside the metal round table. His emotionless gaze stared at Iron Man David in front of him and ordered, "Notify the Lamenter's First Company to send a strike squad and a stormtrooper squad to come with me. Also, notify Natasha and have her come too." "As you command, my lord." The next moment, Iron Man David, with blue light flickering in his eye sockets, shook his metal head slightly. He agreed without hesitation. It seemed that Madame Gao's death also made Iron Man David, who was always quite proud of his management methods, feel some anger that needed to be vented. Boom boom boom. About half an hour later, two Thunderhawk transports carrying Terminator squads and Stormtrooper squads slowly left the landing platform, ascended into the clouds, and sped towards the Americas. Inside the dimly lit cabin, Natasha, who had casually tied her long red hair into a ponytail, also learned from Luo Shah about the news of the assassination of a senior member of their organization. "Lord Primarch, do you have any clues about this?" Natasha blinked her eyes and stared at the Astartes in front of her, who were like small metal mountains. Open black lens bracket recommendation. The app to change sources and chase books is really easy to use. Download it here and you can try it quickly. Close black lens bracket. She turned her head and asked Luo Shah, who was not far away, Luo Sha, with his eyes slightly closed, was silent for a moment. He took a deep breath and said softly, "Not long ago, the leader of the last Hydra faction was found dead at home. The cause of death was a heart attack, which was actually Tony personally delivering the final blow, and according to the requirements of the Inquisition, Tony notified me before taking action. So, Madame Gao's death is unlikely to have been done by Hydra people. Their manpower is almost completely wiped out by Tony and Thor. And according to the situation David reported to me, S.H.I.E.L.D. has recently fallen into some degree of chaos. Rogers is secretly competing with Nick Fury, vying for the orthodox power of S.H.I.E.L.D. currently. Rogers is in a leading position because of the symbolic status of Captain America, so I vaguely suspect that someone wants to pull us into the game. But there is a prerequisite here, that is, the other party is sure that Empire Industries is our auxiliary peripheral unit, and believes that assassinating Madame Gao will definitely cause our reaction, and even cause a fierce conflict between us and official forces like S.H.I.E.L.D. At this moment, Luo Sha's voice just fell. Natasha, who had been thinking with her head down for a moment, suddenly shook her head and said, "Based on my understanding of Nick Fury, he likes to take unconventional approaches, and he has done things like assassinating a leader of a force, but this time, I think it may not be his problem. I have no reason to explain it. Just take it as a special intuition when a special agent encounters a difficult problem. It's all just speculation to say this now. Let's investigate the truth after we survey the death scene." At this moment, Luo Sha, with a blank expression, closed his eyes again and fell into silence. And Natasha, with her brows slightly furrowed, also stroked her forehead and fell into deep thought. Dash 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 dash. Empire Industries headquarters is located on Staten Island after its reconstruction. Today, this island can be said to be one of the most prosperous commercial districts in New York City besides Manhattan Island. Moreover, to some extent, this place has basically become Luo Sha's private territory. Because most of the area's property rights belong to Empire Industries, which is the price that local residents paid to rebuild their homes. After all, even the police officers of the local police station are maintained by the security department of Empire Industries with money and manpower. Buzz buzz buzz, accompanied by the huge roar of the warp engines. 2 Thunderhawk transports landed heavily in front of the headquarters of Empire Industries. After the cabin door opened, the Astartes in Terminator armor and the Stormtrooper squad slowly stepped out of the interior. And the appearance of these metal giants holding bolters also caused the employees responsible for the reception work around them to fall into a daze. Fortunately, with the gradual activity of superheroes and villains like Tony, the public's acceptance of strange things has obviously increased a lot. Many reception employees of Empire Industries immediately reacted and stepped forward with smiling faces. And Luo Sha and Natasha, who had just stepped out of the cabin, were immediately attracted by a silver-haired woman in a mink coat in the crowd. "My lord, she is the director of the security department of Empire Industries, Silver Sable, codenamed Silver Sable." At this moment, Iron Man David, who stepped forward, shook his metal palm in the direction of Silver Sable. Afterwards, the lithe Silver Sable quickly stepped forward. She first carefully looked at the metal skeleton-shaped Iron Man David a few times. Then she turned her gaze and scanned Luo Sha and Natasha in power armor. "Are you Mr. David? Then you must be Lord Luo Sha. Welcome to Empire Industries." The silver-haired Silver Sable showed a perfunctory smile and said to the crowd in front of her, "No need to be polite, I want to see the death scene of Madame Gao, and immediately disperse all irrelevant personnel in the entire headquarters." Luo Sha, squinting his eyes, glanced at the ordinary employees who were raising their mobile phones to take pictures of the Astartes at will. Without looking directly at Silver Sable, he turned his head and nodded his chin towards Iron Man David beside him. Zzz. The next second, the electronic devices of everyone within a kilometer radius immediately went into black screen standby mode, completely losing any function. And the astute Silver Sable also seemed to notice Luo Sha's unexpressed dissatisfaction. She quickly waved her palms a few times at her armed subordinates, and those well-trained subordinates immediately evacuated all the ordinary employees present. I'm sorry, Mr. David and Lord Luo Shaw, after all, Empire Industries is full of ordinary people without any training, and we security personnel can't ask too much of them.
And I personally feel deeply regretful for the accidental death of Madame Gao.
Please come with me. The death scene was heavily protected by us at the first time and has not been damaged by anyone. The headquarters of Imperial Heavy Industries was located inside a building over 200 meters tall.
And Madame Gao died in a private office belonging to a company executive. Ding! Accompanying the slight sound of the elevator's metal doors opening.
Rorschach, clad in vibranium-powered armor, and Iron Man David, led by Silver Sable, stepped onto the 38th floor of the headquarters building. Dong, dong, dong. Just then, from inside a stairwell not far from the elevator, extremely heavy footsteps echoed.
A team of Terminators and a squad of stormtroopers, due to the elevator's weight limit,
had to quickly arrive at this location by climbing the stairs.
However, after the assembled group had just passed through a brightly lit but empty wide corridor.
Within Rorschach's field of vision, dozens of noticeably more robust men were engaging in pushing and shoving physical friction with a group of security personnel in black uniforms. Damn you guys! What exactly are you doing? At this moment, Silver Sable, whose face suddenly turned cold, seemed to feel Rorschach's heavy gaze. She abruptly pulled out a silver pistol from her waist and forcefully pulled the trigger towards the ceiling of the corridor. Pung! Accompanying the rapidly spreading muffled gunshot.
The crowd engaging in physical friction immediately fell into an eerie state of silence.
They stopped their actions at the same time, turning their heads to look in the direction of Silver Sable and the others. Supervisor. These gang dogs want to force their way into Madame Gao's crime scene. A more intense bloody conflict might occur between us and them.
Just then, a security captain in a black uniform stepped forward.
He reported everything that had just happened to Silver Sable one by one. Rorschach, Iron Man David, and Natasha, who were standing to the side, exchanged glances. Rorschach, who quickly activated his vibranium-powered armor, said without hesitation, "We don't need you security personnel here, leave immediately." As soon as his voice fell, Rorschach, whose expression gradually turned cold, immediately stepped forward. The silent Terminator squad and Stormtrooper squad quickly followed behind him. When Rorschach, wearing vibranium-powered armor, passed through the security personnel's mutually gazing ranks and arrived in front of those troublemaking gang dogs, he lowered his head slightly with a blank expression.
His gaze fixed on a man who looked like the gang dog squad leader, and he asked in a low voice,
"Is this a place you should be right now? Has the discipline of the gang dog unit I established deteriorated to this extent?"
"Sir, please allow us to explain. The gang dogs never trusted these newly joined security personnel, and Madame Gao's accident occurred under their protection. I believe."
At this moment, the gang dog captain, whose face was much paler, quickly raised his head to gaze at Rorschach's face, cautiously speaking. Just then, Iron Man David, who was following behind Rorschach, suddenly stepped forward. He whispered into Rorschach's ear, "These gang dogs in front of us are basically all Madame Gao's confidants, but when the incident occurred, they were conducting special training at the gang dogs training base and were not here at headquarters." Hearing Iron Man David's words, Rorschach slowly shook his short, graying head.
Immediately afterward, he narrowed his eyes and subconsciously twitched his nose.
Dong! In an instant, a huge metal palm wrapped in vibranium suddenly pinched the head of the gang dog captain, who was close at hand. At the same time that Rorschach acted, the Terminator squad, still maintaining silence, quickly raised the bolters in their palms and began to relentlessly pull the triggers towards the surrounding unarmed gang dogs and the security personnel who subconsciously raised their weapons. Boom, boom, boom. The constantly roaring bolters rapidly tore apart fragile human tissues, completely shocking everyone present. Open black lens bracket. Seriously, I've been using the Source Change app to read books recently. Switch sources, with many reading voices. Both Android and Apple are available. Close black lens bracket. At the same time, the Stormtrooper squad, whose actions were slightly slower, immediately turned around and raised their bolters.
They easily controlled Silver Sable and some of the security personnel who subconsciously wanted to fire back, and allowed the pale-faced opponents to witness the rapid occurrence of a bloody massacre.
About 10 seconds later, the Terminator squad, who slowly lowered their bolters, moved their heavy steps to survey the shattered corpses scattered throughout the corridor. Subsequently, the Astartes wearing metal helmets shook their heads in Rorschach's direction, indicating that no one was left alive. "What have you just done? Why suddenly go berserk and kill people?" At this moment, Silver Sable, whose metal hand was firmly pressed to the ground by a stormtrooper, gritted her teeth and shouted softly at Rorschach's tall back. And the words spoken by Silver Sable herself were clearly the doubts of Natasha and the stormtrooper squad and others standing aside. But Iron Man David and the Lamenters would never question any of Rorschach's actions. They would only execute orders, just like the massacre that had just occurred. In fact, Rorschach has never been a bloodthirsty and murder-loving tyrant leader. Nor would he indiscriminately massacre his subordinates like some capricious Primarchs. These gang dogs almost all have the residual smell of tobacco and alcohol on them, but this isn't a big problem. After all, they are a reserve force far from the base center. Occasional mistakes don't deserve death. But my keen senses smelled the stench of leaf on many people. Silver Sable, do you know what this represents? This represents that this group of gang dogs has completely lost the value of being trusted, because loyalty is not absolute, it is absolute disloyalty. As for the losses of your security personnel, I admit that the style of action was a bit too extreme, but the Astartes also act according to the old rules. Their living environment is different from yours. I think David will compensate your personnel losses with double the compensation afterwards. At this moment, Rorschach, whose vibranium palm was still clutching the gang dog captain's shattered head, said to the crowd without turning his head. Before Rorschach's voice could fall, Silver Sable, whose face was pale, suddenly took a deep breath. Her gaze fixed on Rorschach's tall back, and she said in a hoarse voice, "I want triple the compensation. And my security department also needs to obtain a batch of laser guns as compensation." Agreed. Following Rorschach's reply, the well-trained stormtrooper squad quickly released Silver Sable, who was being pressed to the ground. They also moved the bolter muzzles away from the controlled security personnel. "My lord, Madame Gao's crime scene is in a room at the end of the corridor. Should we continue to deal with the current matter, or?" Iron Man David, whose eye sockets were flashing blue light, quickly scanned the surrounding scene. He stepped forward and asked Rorschach in a low voice. Rorschach, who took a deep breath of the bloody smell, said without hesitation in a low voice, "David, immediately notify Doom and have him reorganize the Lamenta's first company and bring the entire Astartes company here. Everyone at Imperial Heavy Industries is no longer trustworthy. I now suspect that Madame Gao's death is most likely inseparable from them." Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Chapter 476, Dead People Are More Useful Than Living People. Luo Xia has always adhered to the idea that trust and respect are also combat power. Therefore, his tolerance for other bases and peripheral personnel is quite high. But now, the corruption of this group of gang dogs has made him suspect whether he has given too much freedom and power. You need to know that if Madame Gao is safe and sound, then these gang dogs who were just executed need to be transported to Gemini Island base according to the plan and become one of the supplementary soldiers. Perhaps Luo Xia needs to consider changing the recruitment location of soldiers in the future. Whether it is combat literacy or basic quality, Doom's National Guard is not as good as the first batch of gang dogs. But it is much stronger than the garbage in front of me. About a minute later, the crowd with different expressions stepped on the broken flesh and blood all over the ground and entered the office where Madame Gao was killed. And Luo Xia, who was driving the vibranium power armor, had just stepped inside. He saw at a glance that the floor of the entire room was covered with bulletproof glass fragments and countless scattered documents and papers were dancing randomly. And behind an extremely heavy solid wood desk, Madame Gao's headless body was still placed in place, motionless. At this moment, Iron Man David, with blue light flashing in his eyes, stepped forward. It quickly rotated its metal head and scanned any clues in the crime scene.
Then, Iron Man David quickly calculated the data, turned his head and said to Luo Sha and others.
My lord, according to the traces left at the scene, it was a sniper bullet from outside the floor-to-ceiling window that completely ended Madame Gao's life. Did your security personnel find any clues before? At this moment, Natasha, who had been holding her arms. Natasha, who was frowning, suddenly turned around and asked Silver Sable, who was expressionless. Apart from knowing that Madame Gao died from a sniper assassination, we basically know nothing else, because there are no buildings within a 5-kilometer radius that can be used as a sniper location. Even some buildings outside the 5-kilometer radius, we have also carried out a lot of data analysis on all the monitoring that can be found, and there is no discovery.
Silver Sable, with a serious expression, explained to everyone present in a stiff tone.
After Luo Sha waved his vibranium palm at Iron Man David, he slowly drove the vibranium power armor to the front of the broken floor-to-ceiling window, squinting his eyes and staring at the scene outside. According to Luo Sha's repeated observation, there is indeed no suitable location outside the window of this office to set up a sniper location. Either the suitable building is too far away, at least 7 or 8 kilometers away, or the height is simply not enough. Natasha, according to your understanding, how many humans in the entire world can perform ultra-long-distance sniping of 5 kilometers?
At this moment, Luo Sha, who took a deep breath, asked Natasha without turning his head.
A master who is proficient in ultra-long-distance sniping. I can do sniping within 2 kilometers under completely suitable comprehensive conditions, but this requires very good luck and the assistance of various technological equipment.
A few years ago, there was a super killer who could hit mission targets 4 kilometers away, but the other party was later personally broken by me with both arms and sent to the secret prison of S.H.I.E.L.D. It is unknown whether he is still alive now, and this guy can't hit the target's head position, because this is not safe for a killer at all.
If we are talking about a sniper master who can barely hit the target's head 5 kilometers away, I really know one, that is my good friend Hawkeye. But he hardly uses any guns, but likes to use a special bow and arrow, and even he cannot guarantee success in the current situation. Natasha's thoughts turned quickly when she heard Luo Sha's question.
She introduced to Luo Sha and Iron Man David and others in a clear and detailed manner.
It's just that when Hawkeye, a good friend, was finally involved. Natasha, who frowned slightly, hesitated a little, but she reported it to Luo Sha completely. My lord, I have carefully screened the monitoring data within a 10-kilometer radius and determined that there are no matching target figures in it.
Not long after, Iron Man David, whose eyes were flashing blue light rapidly, suddenly said quickly to Luo Sha's tall back. Perhaps, the other party's sniper location is not on the so-called building, but in some kind of invisible flying vehicle that maintains a certain degree of stability. In this way, only a killer with not so good marksmanship can carry out assassination activities. At this moment, Luo Sha's eyes were fixed on an unnamed bird flying across the field of vision. His whole person suddenly had a flash of inspiration, and he murmured to himself. Quinjet. Could it really be done by someone from S.H.I.E.L.D.? Iron Man David and Natasha, who were standing in the crime scene, said their thoughts and answers at the same time. Natasha, can you contact your friend Hawkeye now? Luo Sha, who slowly turned around while driving the vibranium power armor, looked at Natasha, who was frowning, and asked softly. Lord Luo Sha, although Hawkeye is a senior agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., he is not the kind of guy who only obeys orders from his superiors. I can guarantee you with my life that he is definitely not. No, Natasha, I think you misunderstood. I'm looking for Hawkeye not to kill him. I want you to persuade him to investigate the real situation inside S.H.I.E.L.D., such as the flight records of the Quinjet, and it needs to be hidden from Rogers and Nick Fury.
Do you think you can do this with your friendship? Luo Sha, who shook his head slightly, turned around and walked towards Madame Gao's headless body.
He said to Natasha as he stepped forward. Lord Luo Sha, I think I can do it, thank you for your trust in me.
Natasha, who took a deep breath, subconsciously performed the Sky Eagle salute in the direction of Luo Sha. Immediately afterwards, she immediately turned around and walked out of the room, apparently to contact her friend Hawkeye. And Luo Sha, who walked to the front of the headless body, squinted his eyes and looked at the body a few times. He waved his palm to let Silver Sable and others standing aside temporarily leave the crime scene. After only Iron Man David and the Terminator squad were left around. Luo Sha, with an expressionless face, slowly drove the vibranium power armor and knelt on one knee. He stretched out two metal fingers and randomly dug out the dried-up remains of the Lockhart scarab, which still remained, from the flesh and blood scattered on the ground. Although the Astartes gene detection nerve can acquire memories through devouring, I have only heard that living people can do this. This is the first time I have tried with dead people. Luo Sha, who murmured to himself, took a deep breath. He suddenly swallowed that small piece of dried-up remains. Thank you all for your support. A terrifying taste of bitterness mixed with a fishy stench quietly bloomed on Luo Sha's tongue. He closed his eyes slightly. The genetic detection nerves within his body had gradually begun to operate. In the next second, some black and white, silent memory fragments quickly entered the depths of Luo Sha's mind. Most of them were Gao Furin's complex life experiences from her hundreds of years of age. But there were also some secrets that even Luo Sha didn't know, revealed one by one. For example, the legendary 7 capitals of paradise, and the long-inherited living immortal weapons. For example, Gao Furin was once the daughter of the Crane Mother of Crane City, one of the 7 capitals of paradise. But because she coveted the wealth and glory of the human world, she abandoned her innate responsibilities. Unfortunately, these secrets could not solve the mystery of Gao Furin's death for Luo Sha. So, he subconsciously accelerated the flow of a large number of memory fragments. And as the memory fragments approached the time of Gao Furin's death, many memory fragments gradually changed from black and white to colorful, and added some intermittent, blurred sounds. Loyalty to our Lord Luo Sha is your only responsibility from now on, and it is he who has given you a brand new life. This was a memory fragment of Gao Furin personally recruiting a group of gang dogs. Our Lord will not tolerate your petty actions. The leader must be punished, and your foolish behavior has disappointed me, the leader. Gao Furin seemed to be reprimanding her trusted subordinates. However, due to the fragmentation of many memory fragments, the figures in front of Gao Furin could not be clearly distinguished. However, just as the flow of memory fragments gradually decreased, and Luo Sha was about to give up completely, a silent scene from the last memory fragment suddenly appeared in his mind. That seemed to be the most memorable scene before Gao Furin's death. Inside an office decorated exactly like the crime scene, several gang dog confidants with ugly faces were fiercely confronting Gao Furin behind the desk. And Luo Sha, who happened to be in the third-person perspective, saw at a glance the laser guns hidden behind those gang dogs. Obviously, these guys, for some reason, were prepared to assassinate Gao Furin. However, just as the verbal confrontation between the two sides became more and more tense, Gao Furin, who had just stood up from her chair, suddenly turned her white-haired head. Her gaze also subconsciously looked out the French window. There must have been something strange there that caught her attention. In the next second, a sniper bullet that shattered the bulletproof French window quickly passed through the air, forcibly blasting Gao Furin's entire head. Peeved. At this moment, Luo Sha, with a cold expression, slowly opened his closed eyes. His lips moved quickly a few times. The moist brain matter from Gao Furin, mixed with a large amount of saliva, was spat out in one gulp. Immediately afterwards, Luo Sha, driving the vibranium-powered armor, stood up and gently pushed away the tall chair in front of him that carried the headless corpse. He conveniently pried out a twisted and deformed sniper bullet from the wall behind him. Luo Sha raised his hand and scanned the sniper bullet in front of him a few times. His vibranium palm waved gently, and the sniper bullet suddenly cut through the air. It was caught by Iron Man David, who was standing not far away. David, analyze the material and possible origin of the sniper bullet. Also, tell Doom to speed up the deployment of the Wailing One Company. Luo Sha slightly raised his chin. He signaled the Terminator squad standing around to be vigilant, and also ordered Iron Man David. My lord, have you discovered some of the truth? At this moment, Iron Man David, with blue light flickering in his eyes, asked Luo Sha. My previous guess has been partially verified. Gao Furan was indeed killed by a sniper from outside the window, and it was definitely fired from a Quinjet that can be invisible, but whose engine sound cannot be hidden. But, at the time of the incident, something else was happening at the same time, and that was that the gang dog squad that had been training before actually planned to assassinate Gao Furan. If someone hadn't acted in advance, then what we would be facing now would be a betrayal from our own team.
Therefore, regardless of whether all the gang dogs participated in or condoned the occurrence of this matter, this batch of gang dogs cannot be left. Eradicate them completely.
At this moment, Luo Sha, who was driving the vibranium-powered armor back and forth, said in a cold tone to everyone present.
My lord, I have already used some tempting means to gather all the gang dogs to their training ground. The Wailing One Company has already boarded the plane and departed, and Doom himself has also learned of our order to clear the rebels. Iron Man David, with blue light flickering in his eyes a few times, preemptively made a series of concealed operations without hesitation. Then, it shook its metal head slightly and began to report to Luo Sha. David, after these things are over, brainwash all the senior personnel of Empire Industries. I don't want to see similar things happen again. Perhaps, our team also needs a few political commissars to provide auxiliary education. Now, relying only on the basic concept of fighting for the future of mankind and the reward of a large amount of wealth, it is still impossible to completely win people's hearts. Tisk tisk, human minds are really complicated. Luo Sha, who took a deep breath, stopped his heavy footsteps. He frowned slightly and subconsciously let out a sigh, muttering to himself.
The noisy streets of New York City. Natasha, who had just completed her disguise, walked in the crowd wearing a black baseball cap. She brushed past every pedestrian with different expressions. But she did not attract the attention of the other party at all. This undoubtedly revealed Natasha's basic qualities as a top agent. Thump! Just at this moment, Natasha, who was striding forward, was suddenly bumped on the shoulder by a tall figure who was also wearing a black baseball cap. And when Natasha, who was full of vigilance, wanted to make an offensive reaction, a coffee paper cup filled with ice cubes was suddenly stuffed into one of her hands by the person who turned around. Natasha, I thought you were dead. I even planned to secretly prepare a funeral for you. At this moment, this tall man wearing a black baseball cap casually put his arm around Natasha's shoulder. He turned his head and looked at the other party with a sincere tone. Long time no see, old friend. How are Laura and the kids? A relaxed smile appeared on the corner of Natasha's mouth. She subconsciously raised the coffee paper cup in her palm and took a sip, then frowned slightly and said, It's low-quality black coffee again, Francis. Where did you spend the extra money you earned from S.H.I.E.L.D.? Natasha, Laura and the children miss you very much. Go see them when you have time. And I think since you can return to New York, it means you are not afraid of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s subsequent accountability now, right? The tall man named Clint Barton smiled gently. He didn't care about his friend's complaints about his frugal habits, but quickly changed the subject. I chose to change my boss. The treatment the other party gave me is not bad. Clint, let's catch up later. I came to you for some more important things. If everything goes well, maybe you can avoid S.H.I.E.L.D. from provoking enemies they shouldn't provoke, which is my boss. Natasha, I knew you didn't come to me for anything good. Then tell me, what do you need me to do? Thank you all for your support. Chapter 478. The End of the Gangdogs. Boom boom boom, accompanied by the deafening roar of vector engines. More than 20 Thunderhawk transport ships slowly descended from the sky. Before the slightly swaying, massive fuselage had completely stabilized, the dim interior of the gradually opening cabins. One by one, Carcharodons in black and white speed-patterned power armor quickly jumped out of the transport ships. Their magnetic boots heavily crushing the concrete ground below. Entering combat status, the Astartes quickly reorganized their ranks according to past experience. They divided into assault squads and heavy weapon squads with familiar combat styles, and then lined up neatly in front of Doom, who was draped in a dark green cloak. Doom raised his hand and waved, telling everyone to stand by. He then activated his silver-armored power armor and walked towards Rorschach and the others standing not far away. Lord Rorschach, Mr. David, What exactly happened here that required the entire Carcharodon's company to be dispatched? Mr. David only told me that there were some signs of rebellion, but did not explain in detail. Doom's gaze turned to Rorschach, who was squinting. He asked in a low voice. Just before you arrived here, David retrieved the network account information of the gang dog unit and the deliberately deleted monitoring data, and discovered that these guys, who had lost base supervision, had once again dominated the entire American underworld in the name of the gang dogs. I don't know where they got the courage, but they not only completely monopolized the smuggling channels belonging to the Imperial Heavy Industries, but even started doing the hallucinogenic substance business that I explicitly forbade. And all they gained was just some wealth that David could create at will. My lord, this is my dereliction of duty. I gave Madame Gao's forces too much autonomy, which led to the current situation. At this moment, Iron Man David, with blue light flickering in his eye sockets, bowed slightly to Rorschach beside him, his tone full of apology. David, the current situation has nothing to do with you. It is the unchanging nature of those gang dogs. I believe that even if the assassination of a superior had not occurred, perhaps they would have come up with other problems after losing supervision. We should be glad that we discovered these situations in advance. Otherwise, if a similar betrayal occurred in an important battle, the personnel losses would be more than just Madame Gao alone. According to the information Natasha sent back not long ago, she and her friend Hawkeye are investigating the situation at S.H.I.E.L.D. before they find the real killer. We need to solve the problems within our own team first. Doom, you and I will lead the Carcharodons to send those gang dogs to meet the Emperor. As Rorschach finished speaking, his face remained expressionless as he took a chainsword and bolter handed over by the Terminator squad behind him. Then, Rorschach's gaze focused on Doom in front of him and the entire company of Astartes not far away. Carcharodon's first company, advance with me. Following the issuance of Rorschach's order, the entire Carcharodon's company quickly took action. They obtained detailed maps of the surrounding area on the screens inside their metal helmets. Then, the Astartes, divided into 10 assault squads and several heavy weapons squads, quickly changed direction and launched an encirclement operation towards the target location a few kilometers away. And the gang dogs' training ground is near the headquarters of Imperial Heavy Industries. This undoubtedly saved Rorschach and the others the trouble of having to evacuate civilians in advance. Because the buildings within a few kilometers are all private territory of Imperial Heavy Industries. Soon after, a low building resembling a large factory appeared in the helmet visors of the Astartes. An assault squad holding bolters quickly received the order to attack from the Carcharodon's first company captain. They activated the speed-patterned power armor on their bodies and launched a swift raid on the only entrance of the building. Swoosh swoosh swoosh, however, at this moment, extremely hot lasers suddenly melted the window positions on the low building, launching a fierce attack on the advancing Carcharodon's assault squad. At the same time, heavy lumber guns, originally used for shooting training, were also set up in high places, and continuous roars echoed as the muzzles flashed with fire. Tisk. I have to say that our training is still very effective. It is a kind of courage for a group of mortal troops to be able to resist the attack of the Astartes, but it is a pity that they used it in the wrong place. Rorschach, squinting, stared at the gang dogs who had launched a counterattack. He sneered and casually said to Iron Man David and Doom beside him. At this moment, the first Carcharodon's assault squad to launch the charge had already rushed into the entrance of the low building, enduring countless laser beams and solid bullets. They quickly moved the bolters in their palms. With unparalleled precision, they fired at any rebellious gang dogs appearing within the range of their visors. Immediately afterwards, more assault squads and heavy weapons squads also used powerful firepower to blast open several entrances on the thick walls of the building under the careful command of the Carcharodon's first company captain. And those Astartes wearing speed-patterned power armor launched a charge and fired into the building at a running speed that ordinary human eyes could hardly distinguish. Rather than saying this was a pacification operation, it would be better to say that this was a slaughter show belonging to the Carcharodon's first company. Even high-level combatants like Rorschach and Doom did not even have a chance to play. The few assault squads of the Carcharodon's company almost cleaned up the thousands of gang dogs in the entire training ground who chose to resist to the end. After the roar of the bolters thinned out a lot, Rorschach, Doom, and others driving their vibranium power armor stepped into this training ground that once belonged to the gang dogs, stepping on the rubble and flesh and blood wreckage all over the ground. At this moment, dozens of Astartes with only some bullet marks on their power armor shells were searching the many rooms inside the building one by one. They suddenly raised a ceramite-clad magnetic boot and heavily kicked open the doors and some walls. Then, without hesitation, they raised the bolters in their palms and completely ended the lives of those gang dogs who tried to hide. Lord Rorschach, why are you slaughtering us? The gang dogs are incomparably loyal to you. At this moment, a gang dog who had an arm blown off by a bolter stumbled out of his hiding place. While issuing a grief-stricken question to Rorschach not far away, he was also running forward. And just as the surrounding Carcharodons were planning to raise their bolters to finish off this gang dog, Rorschach, with a blank expression, suddenly raised a metal palm, stopping everyone's subsequent actions. At this moment, Rorschach, clutching the chainsword in his palm, drove the vibranium power armor and stepped forward. He slightly lowered his head with short gray-white hair. His cold gaze stared at the one-armed gang dog who finally knelt on the floor due to staggering steps. You alone may be innocent, but when the other gang dogs committed acts of betrayal, why didn't you and those who watched coldly resist? If you had resisted in the beginning, even if you had failed in the end, I would have avenged you who died, recognized your honor. And why would you have fallen to this point now? It's a pity that you didn't do anything, and when you were forced to become a traitor, you should have thought about the punishment that my team has for betrayal. Rorschach said with regret in a low voice. He also slowly raised the chainsword in his palm. Heh, everyone says that loyalty is not absolute, that it is absolute disloyalty. We also thought this was just a meaningless joke and meme, but no one has ever taken it seriously. At this moment, the one-armed gang dog with a pale face subconsciously raised his sweat-covered head. He looked up at Rorschach in front of him with vacant eyes, and gave a wry smile with a distorted expression. This is the truth and rules that the human empire has piled up with countless lives. You, rest in peace. In the next second, Rorschach, with a cold expression, heavily swung down the chainsword and chopped off the head of this rebellious gang dog with one sword. Thank you all for your support. At this moment, a snow-white human skull with a yellowish tinge was being carefully scrubbed and cleaned by Iron Man David. After all traces of blood had been removed and the degreasing process was complete. This head specimen, belonging to the crippled arm gang dog, was carefully plated with a layer of silver metal by Iron Man David, who then turned and handed it to a nonchalant Luo Shaw. Luo Shaw raised his hand and accepted the silver skull. A massive hand encased in vibranium repeatedly caressed it, as if playing with a toy. Luo Shaw wasn't acting on a whim. Nor had he simply succumbed to corn due to excessive killing. He merely wanted to use this silver skull as a symbol or memento to remind himself. Because from this moment on, the unit designation, Gang Dog, would be permanently sealed by the team and never used again. Even the first batch of gang dogs stationed at the Gemini Island base would be completely renamed the Stormtrooper Legion. However, they would be divided into elite stormtroopers who could wear auxiliary power armor, and probationary stormtroopers who had not yet qualified for armor. At the same time, Iron Man David had already ordered Redditus to bring the Hydra brainwashing device from the Gemini Island base. While Luo Shaw casually played with the silver skull under the gaze of the pale-faced executives of Imperial Heavy Industries, Iron Man David, with blue light flashing in his eye sockets, led the Lamenters in initiating the brainwashing procedure on the executives. During this time, Silver Sable, the security director who had basically been paying attention to everything that was happening, seemed unwilling. However, the Astartes' terrifying massacre of the gang dogs had completely deterred anyone from harboring any small thoughts. In the end, she had no choice but to become a loyal member of the team. And most surprisingly, Luo Shaw even saw Eugene, who had just been promoted to security squad leader, among the high-level personnel of the security department. He originally wanted to go up and chat with his old friend whom he hadn't seen for a long time, but the thought quickly faded away as soon as it arose. Because he inadvertently saw the fear and unease on Eugene's face, as well as the fleeting confusion and incomprehension. The former Luo Sha might still have had friends, but the Primarch Luo Sha no longer had many ordinary friends to chat with happily. Soon after, the undercurrents surging Imperial heavy industries quickly became a pool of loyal stagnant water. Their only role from now on would be to build material reserve warehouses and mobilize necessary war materials around the world. After a brief moment of contemplation, Luo Sha ordered Iron Man David to transfer the loyal Titania and 2 Winter Soldiers who had been awakened from hibernation from the Gemini Island base. Titania used to be Leo of the Leviathan Zodiac, specializing in the organization's various diplomatic affairs. Moreover, her combat power could be said to be not weak, and it was truly a waste to keep her stationed at the Gemini Island base as a combat instructor. Now, with the assistance and protection of the 2 Winter Soldiers, Titania would soon become the sole manager of Imperial Heavy Industries. Having experienced many things, Luo Sha now understood that loyalty was more important than ability in some cases. Just like the countless planetary governors of the human empire, as long as they paid their taxes to Terra on time, what did it matter if they were tyrants who oppressed the common people? Of course, according to Luo Sha's style, he would personally go to that planet. Then, he would casually crush the other party's head and reselect a suitable planetary governor. After all, killing one person or a group of people could reduce the risk of the entire planet being corrupted by chaos, which was a worthwhile trade. Luo Sha and the Lamenter's first company temporarily stayed at the headquarters of Imperial Heavy Industries. They were waiting for Natasha to investigate the real murderer who killed Madame Gao and completely resolve this matter. However, just as Titania and the Winter Soldiers had just arrived at Staten Island aboard a Thunderhawk transport, an unexpected visitor once again came to pay a visit. Rumble rumble. Accompanied by a Quinjet with a black metal shell slowly landing on the helipad. After the engine gradually died down and the metal hatch opened, Captain America Rogers, with a solemn expression, jumped out of the cabin nimbly with his precious shield on his back. Following closely behind, a muscular strongman with a brown beard and a monkey in a fine suit, each holding a cigar and cigarette, also jumped out of the cabin. At this moment, Luo Sha, wearing vibranium power armor, led a squad of Terminator bodyguards and Iron Man David out of the main gate of Imperial Heavy Industries, striding towards the direction of the visitors. "Rogers, are you here to have afternoon tea with me?" Luo Sha, with a nonchalant expression, glanced at the muscular strongman following behind Rogers. His gaze lingered on the monkey wearing sunglasses and a fine suit for a while, before asking Rogers with a solemn expression. "I only knew that Imperial Heavy Industries was a new force to be reckoned with, but I never expected this to be your territory. Long time no see, Luo Sha." Rogers was slightly stunned when he saw Luo Sha appear. Quickly reacting, he subconsciously glanced at the Terminator bodyguards and Iron Man David following behind Luo Sha. Then, Rogers blinked his eyes, took a deep breath, and said, "SHIELD's duty is to ensure the safety of the country and its people. Although the headquarters of Imperial Heavy Industries is private property, a very fierce firefight has just occurred here, and I have to come and see what's going on. Then you guys must be very idle, to be able to spare manpower to monitor the movements of every city. How come I heard that you have recently been fighting with Nick Fury for internal power? How is your progress? Do you need me to lend you a hand?" Luo Sha, squinting his eyes, revealed a fleeting sneer from the corner of his mouth. He slightly raised his chin, his gaze fixed on Rogers and the others in front of him, and said indifferently, "Nick Fury and I merely have disagreements. SHIELD should restore the ideal state it had at the beginning, but I will not resort to underhanded tricks just to win. I am a super soldier who protects the country, not a special agent spy who only sees benefit. By the way, how is Natasha doing?" Facing Luo Sha's verbal sarcasm, Rogers, with a sincere expression, shook his head without anger. "She is fine, but because of her disappointment with your SHIELD and Nick Fury, Natasha has chosen a new." Pung! Just at this moment, before Luo Sha could finish speaking, a slender solid bullet that instantly tore through the air, carrying a deadly screech, flew rapidly towards the location of Luo Sha and the others. Luo Sha, whose dynamic vision was extremely sharp, suddenly widened his eyes. 10 metal rings located on the vibranium arm, at a reaction speed far exceeding everyone present, immediately rose into the air. In an instant, the metal 10 rings, filled with purple energy, forcibly formed a metal barrier, and instantly blocked the sniper bullet that was shot towards Roger's head. Squeak, squeak, squeak. In a flash of lightning, an extremely ear-piercing and sharp monkey warning cry echoed all around. The sunglasses-wearing monkey in a fine suit did a backflip on the spot, and deftly drew a revolver from behind his waist, gripping it tightly in his claws. At the same time, the muscular strongman with the brown beard immediately lowered his back, a look of vigilance on his face. Even faster than the irritating monkey cries was the Terminator squad following behind Luo Sha. 5 large Astartes drove their Terminator armor and strode forward. Grasping bolters, they firmly formed a heavy wall of metal in front of Luo Sha. 3 o'clock direction, altitude 150 meters, 5 kilometers away. The next second, Iron Man David, blue light flashing in his eye sockets, suddenly turned his metal head. He quickly reported the direction and position of the enemy to everyone around. Doom! Luo Sha took a deep breath and roared towards the headquarters of Imperial Heavy Industries without turning his head. The next second, 2 assault squads belonging to the Lamenter's first company instantly activated the jet thrusters of their speed-type power armor. Their massive metal bodies, like terrifying black and white phantoms, rushed out of the shadows of the building, desperately running towards the target's location. At the same time, Doom, his dark green cloak rustling, suddenly flew into the air from the ground. He slightly confirmed the direction and quickly sped towards the enemy's position that Iron Man David had just sent. Only then did Luo Sha, with metal 10 rings slowly gathering and floating above his head, turn his cautious gaze to Rogers, who had subconsciously widened his eyes. The shooting target of this sniper bullet is not me, it's you, Rogers. With a solemn expression, Luo Sha raised a vibranium palm towards the other party. A slender sniper bullet, brass-colored and seemingly carrying residual heat, was presented in front of everyone. Duggan, killer monkey, come with me. At this moment, Rogers, his expression changing, took a deep breath. He immediately raised his hand and took down the vibranium shield from his back. Turning his head, he wanted to lead his 2 teammates to pursue the enemy's location. However, Luo Sha, his expression gradually returning to calmness, stretched out a thick arm wrapped in vibranium, blocking Rogers' chest. He condescendingly looked down at Rogers, whose expression was somewhat stiff, and said calmly, "My people have already moved out. No matter who wants to play assassin to kill you, they won't be able to escape. Rogers, you should stay calm." Luo Sha, thank you. I owe you a life. If it weren't for your help just now, I think I would have gone to see old friends now. Rogers, gradually returning to a calm state, slowly put the vibranium shield back on his back. He slightly raised his head, his gaze fixed on Luo Sha's angular face, and said in a deep voice, "Rogers, do you believe that if you had just died, we would definitely have started a war with S.H.I.E.L.D. and the entire nation's official forces? It seems that someone wants to muddy the waters with your death." "No, to be precise, we are already in the game. Don't you want to know why a firefight broke out on our territory? That's because one of my agents was sniped, and it was most likely done by someone within your shield. I just had my men clean up some not-so-loyal traitors." Luo Sha, squinting his eyes, slowly raised a vibranium palm. He carefully examined the slender bullet held between his 2 fingers. Then, Luo Sha casually threw the sniper bullet to Iron Man David, who was standing aside. "David, analyze the material and trajectory of this bullet to see if it's the same kind of bullet that killed Madame Gao." "As you command, my lord." Iron Man David, blue light flashing in his eye sockets, raised his hand and caught the slender bullet. Blue rays of light quickly scanned the metal object in his palm. "People from S.H.I.E.L.D., if that's really the case, perhaps I shouldn't try to save Carter's life's work, but completely tear it down and rebuild it." At this moment, Rogers, taking a deep breath, did not doubt Luo Sha's words and judgment. After all, the combat power of the other party's entire team and the heroic act of saving him just now were undeniable facts. If Luo Sha was determined to destroy S.H.I.E.L.D., Rogers asked himself if he could stop it from happening. Of course, don't forget that there are still many Hydra remnants in your S.H.I.E.L.D. Although Tony and Thor are cleaning up at a good pace, they haven't completely killed these tumors. My people will try their best to capture the assassin alive. If, unfortunately, only a corpse is found, I have other ways to deal with it. The whole truth will always come to light. Luo Sha, squinting his eyes, raised his hand and patted Rogers on the shoulder to show comfort. He then turned his head to look at Doom, who was floating in the air in the distance, and said in a low voice. About 15 minutes later. Inside the headquarters of Imperial Heavy Industries. A strong man whose hands and feet had been broken by the Astartes was dragged in front of Luo Sha and the others like a dead dog. A scarlet drag mark, full of fresh blood, was clearly visible on the almost spotless marble floor. Unfortunately, everyone present was a battle-hardened killing star, with no emotional fluctuations about the small scene in front of them. Even the animal called Killer Monkey crossed his arms and coldly watched the assassin lying on the ground. However, when the strong man, who was close to unconsciousness due to massive blood loss, was grabbed by the hair and lifted up by Doom, who had followed behind, Luo Sha, frowning slightly, stared at the white skull symbol soaked in blood on the other party's chest, his eyes widening slightly. The Punisher? Why would he come to assassinate Rogers? Rogers, have you dealt with him before? Do you have personal grudges between you? At this moment, Luo Sha, very puzzled, turned his head to look at Rogers, who also looked blank, and asked. I know there is such a person, and I have also seen his information. Moreover, according to some things Natasha once told me, the Punisher can't be considered a true hero, but he is not someone who kills innocent people indiscriminately. Luo Sha, do you have a way to make him talk? I think there must be something strange about this, we must figure it out. Rogers, frowning, paced back and forth. He suddenly nodded to Luo Sha. Doom, feed him a panacea capsule, don't let him die. Luo Sha, expressionless, nodded slightly in Doom's direction. Doom, who had received the order, took out a bottle of panacea capsules from under his dark green cloak. He used magical telekinesis to twist the bottle cap. Then, a capsule was stuffed into the mouth of the Punisher, who was unconscious like a dead dog. Cough cough, dozens of seconds later, the healing effect that gradually took effect completely awakened the bruised and swollen Punisher from his comatose state. Frank Castle, can you tell me, why did you come to assassinate Captain America? Or rather, who sent you here? At this moment, Luo Sha, squinting his eyes, rubbed his chin with a vibranium hand. He asked the other party in a deep voice, TCH. However, the Punisher, seemingly understanding his situation, only spat a mouthful of blood onto the marble floor in front of him. He barely grinned coldly, and muttered in a hoarse voice. Falling into your hands is my own problem with combat ability, but the remnants of Hydra, that's trash that everyone can kill. Wait, what did you just say? Remnants of Hydra? Who? Us? At this moment, Luo Sha and Doom, raising their eyebrows slightly, looked at each other. Rogers, who was standing aside, also subconsciously turned his head to look at Luo Sha. Then, Luo Sha, as the mastermind behind the destruction of the Hydra organization, couldn't help but sneer. Heh, Frank, can you tell me, since we are all remnants of Hydra, then who is this Rogers? He is the most deserving to die. He is Captain Hydra. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.